Okay, so first things first, forget all those fortune cookie sayings. Today, we're diving into the Analects of Confucius, and we're not talking about quaint little proverbs. No, we're looking at what this book truly is a pretty radical blueprint for how to rebuild a society that's literally on the brink of collapse, written by a man who was right there in the middle of all the chaos.
And really, it all comes down to this one simple, massive question. How do you rebuild a broken world? I mean, that feels just as relevant today as it did 2,500 years ago, right? And you have to remember, Confucius wasn't just some philosopher sitting in an ivory tower. He was a political advisor, a teacher. He was desperately trying to find an answer to this before his entire world just fell apart for good. So let's just set the scene for a second. To really get the genius of Confucius's solution, you have to appreciate the sheer scale of the problem he was trying to solve. And believe me, it was monumental. Confucius was basically born into the slow-motion collapse of a dynasty, the Chao dynasty. Just imagine this, a huge kingdom where the emperor's power had been draining away for centuries. He's living in this era of incredible instability, this kind of fragile peace that was just about to completely shatter into what we now call the Warring States period, which happened right after he died. And this slide, it really lays out all the symptoms of that decay. You've got an emperor who's just a figurehead with no real power. The real power belongs to these regional lords who are just constantly at war with each other. And it gets worse. Even inside those little states, super powerful families, like the three clans in Confucius's own hometown, were stealing power from their own leaders. The result? A total breakdown of, well, everything. Social norms, tradition, morality. The crisis was so bad that all these other philosophies like Taoism and Moism started popping up, also trying to figure out a cure for all the chaos. So, you're Confucius. You're looking at all this violence, all this instability. What do you think the problem is? Well, his diagnosis was really radical for the time because he didn't point his finger at external stuff. He pointed inward. This quote, this gets right to the heart of it. See, for Confucius, the problem wasn't a lack of laws. It was a lack of inner morality. You can force people to obey you with punishments, for sure, but you can't force them to be decent human beings. Without a shared sense of shame, an internal moral compass, society it falls apart. And this is where it gets really interesting. Confucius pivots from just diagnosing the problem to actually offering a solution. His plan was to rebuild society from the inside out, starting with each individual person. And his whole blueprint for getting that order back is built on these three interconnected pillars. First up, and this is the big one, is Ren. Now, it's often translated as benevolence or humanity, but honestly, it's so much deeper than that. Think of it as a profound, active empathy, a selfless concern for the well-being of every single other person. It is the absolute bedrock of his entire system. And this quote shows you that Ren isn't some passive feeling you just have. It's an act of will. It's a conscious choice you make to center your entire life around compassion for others. The idea is, if you truly commit to Ren, doing something evil becomes pretty much unthinkable. Okay, so the second pillar is Li. If Ren is that deep inner feeling, then Li is how you show it on the outside. It's ritual, it's courtesy, it's all the rules of how you're supposed to act. But, and this is key, it's not about empty ceremony. Think of it more like a social grammar that lets us all interact with each other respectfully. It was a direct response to the chaos of his time, where warlords just used brute force instead of following any norms. Li is how you take that inner benevolence and turn it into orderly, predictable, and respectful action. And wow, this quote just ties it all together perfectly. It shows you the direct link between the two. You can't have real Li without the inner feeling of Ren, but you also can't really develop Ren without the outward practice of Li. By consistently acting with courtesy and respect for others, you're actually training yourself, disciplining your own ego, and growing genuine compassion. They are literally two sides of the same coin, which of course leads us to the third pillar, the Junzi. You can think of it as the superior person. This is the ultimate goal of all that self-cultivation. The Junzi is the person who has totally mastered that balance, who has successfully blended their inner benevolence, Ren, with their outer propriety, Li. They aren't just polite, their actions are a real reflection of a compassionate heart. And these are the people who become the moral pillars that hold up their families, their communities, and eventually the whole state. What I love about this quote is that it shows you the Junzi isn't just a morally good person in private, they're a public servant at heart. It's all about being committed to the greater good. A superior person is broad-minded and fair, while the small man, as he calls them, is just consumed by their own self-interest and their own little tribe.
So, how on earth did this blueprint, which was basically just a collection of conversations written down by his students, how did it become the ideological foundation for one of the world's most enduring civilizations? Well, the influence is just staggering, really. After his teachings were all compiled into the Analects, they were eventually picked up by the incredibly powerful Han Dynasty and made into the official state philosophy. And get this, for almost 2,000 years, the only way to get a job in the government was to master the Confucian classics. This just embedded his ideas about duty, order, and morality deep, deep into the cultural DNA of China and a huge part of East Asia.
All right, so why does any of this matter to us right now? Well, because the popular image we have of Confucius in the West, it often misses the entire point. This slide really gets to the heart of the modern misunderstanding. We've kind of reduced him to this guy who says wise things for fortune cookies, but he was a hands-on, practical political advisor. We see him as this symbol of rigid, old-fashioned tradition, but he was actually a radical reformer who built his whole system on empathy. He wasn't demanding blind obedience. He argued that leaders have to earn respect. And maybe the most revolutionary idea of all, his ideal of the superior person had nothing to do with being born noble. It was a status anyone could achieve through learning and self-improvement. Which kind of brings us to a final thought to leave you with. Confucius built his entire blueprint for society on this idea of our duties to one another, our duty to our family, our community, our state. So, in an age that so often celebrates radical individualism, what can we actually learn from a philosophy that argues our humanity is found not in breaking away from each other, but in strengthening the bonds between us?
This is for entertainment and educational purposes only.